just gonna mute you guys. All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kadeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. V'arevna Adonai Eloheinu divrei Toratcha v'finu pi avcha Beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzeimcha Beit Yisrael. Kulani yodea shemecha v'lomdei Toratech lishma. Baruch atah Adonai l'med Torah l'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabanu mikol amim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notena Torah. Okay, so we learn in the Mishnah Brura. I'm not sure where Gavin is. We learn in the Mishnah by Rabbi Daniel Brody. More halachas for the cap for the vasing cup. Okay, so the cup used for a mitzvah should be cleaned beforehand. It should be wiped on the inside and rinsed on the outside. If it was cleaned already, such as after the earlier meal, one does not need to wipe it. Okay, this is from the Shulchan Aruch, 183, part 1. And pouring fresh wine. When pouring the wine, one should have intention for the mitzvah that one will do it. In other words, that you're pouring the wine from the bottle as preparation for Kiddush Havdalah. For this purpose, one should also pour the wine as close as possible to the mitzvah, so it's clearly for it. In other words, there shouldn't be a hefsek, there shouldn't be a break of time between pouring it and actually doing the bracha and drinking it. One should fill the cup and need not overflow except for Havdalah. However, as long as there's a revi, it is fine. Okay? And basically diluting the wine during benching. When benching on a cup, one should start off with strong wine and dilute it slightly with water only when one begins the second bracha of the benching. The reason is because the bracha praises the wonderful land of Eretz Yisrael that Hashem gave us, and one of the great attributes to it is the strong wine that it produces. Nowadays, most of our wines aren't particularly strong, and so one does not need to add any water to it. I mean, if you study cases in the Gemara, it actually gives you some of the quantities of dilution. But today the wine certainly isn't as strong. Regarding women, as mentioned, the minhag custom is not to bench on a cup when one benches alone, but when there are 3 or more people, it is best to do so. The minhag is that women don't bench on a cup of wine, even when there are 3 women benching together. It's not forbidden, just that it's not very common for women to make their own mezuman. The poskim don't encourage women to drink wine. The reason why women shouldn't drink Havdalah wine is a separate issue. That is, regarding making the benching of it, we'll learn another rule, that the cups used for a mitzvah is also to give some to one's wife to drink. Again, all these requirements are the ideal way to make a bracha. However, if one did not have any of them, one still makes a valid bracha. We're on 20A1.
Yeah.
Okay. And what we did discuss last time is a case of Shimon, who owns a property, and Reuven is renting that property from Shimon, and Shimon doesn't know that Reuven rented it out to somebody else. It could have been that Shimon decided to go overseas for a while and wanted to get some rent to make up the rent that he was paying. Okay. So if the owner became aware of this, or if the tenant that was renting from Shimon was aware that Reuven is actually the owner, the obligation is to pay the owner.
Okay.
That's the halachic obligation. That's all we learned, because it proves there that the owner's intention of the property was a property he had for rent, because he rented to his tenant. And the fact that somebody wanted to rent it from his tenant proves that the person was willing to pay for such a benefit. So therefore, when there was a benefit that should have been accrued to the owner, plus the person was willing to pay that benefit by staying elsewhere, he does pay that benefit. Is that clear? Yeah. So that's the case that was pretty straightforward. The only other case is that if there was no reason that the person if there's no reason that the person had their house for rent, in that particular case, you wouldn't necessarily have to pay by rent. That was the discussion with regards to Rav Huna. All right. So now we're going to a next section. It says Rav Sechora said in the name of Rav, one who lives in the yard of his fellow, which is not for rent, without the latter's knowledge, does not have to pay him rent, because it's stated, and through desolation the gate is broken apart. All right. So what does this mean? It's a cryptic verse. It's in Isaiah chapter 24, verse 12. It means that a vacant house is broken apart by the demons of destruction. So basically it tears down the gate of the vacant house. So what are we talking about? So there's two possible explanations, and Arthur actually mentioned this last time. What did Arthur mention? He says, well, what happens if you're looking after the house while somebody's away? Meaning they never asked you to, but they did somehow guard the house or look after the house in some way. Do you remember, Arthur, you did mention it?
Yeah.
So we're saying there's two types of physical guarding of a house here. The one particular sort of protection is that we learn in Gemara Brochas, if a place remains uninhabitable, in other words, nobody actually lives in that particular property and it's desolate, the negative forces that reside there. So what we're learning is that there's a lot of activity. The spiritual forces don't reside there in the same place. And that's why there was a warning in Gemara Brochas in the beginning not to visit a desolate building or to swim in a lake. In other words, how many of us would feel comfortable just swimming into a lake where no inhabitants have been around for a long time? There's something very spooky about it. So what we learn is that there are spiritual forces at which we can't perceive with our five senses. And that since the person is squatting in a vacant house that is not rent, we actually benefit the owner. Guys, I'm hearing a lot of banging, crockery and crockery.
Yeah, I'll go on mute. No problem.
I must go on mute. It could be me.
All right. So in any case, what it's saying is that the one who squats in a vacant house that's not for rent, this is according to Rashi, actually benefits the owner by staving off the forces of destruction. Accordingly, he need not pay rent to the owner, for it's a case of this one benefits and this one benefits. However, if the house were for rent, would he have to pay the owner rent? I'm going to ask Arthur this particular question because Arthur's the one who actually brought this suggestion up.
Yes, well, if the house was for rent, yes, you would have to pay for rent.
Okay, why?
Because the guy that's taken the land, if the place, it means it's available again. It's like being in a hotel. Okay, the place is available. It's new, so it's not like a barn.
Correct. So what we're learning here is exactly as Arthur said, is that you see, if the place is available for rent and the person is staying there rent free, the person is not benefiting; he's sustaining a loss. And what happens if you turn around and say, but what about the negative forces that would disappear as a result of somebody occupying the house? Well, guess what? If you're renting out the house, whoever's renting it out is going to be there occupying the house to prevent the negative forces anyway. So you might as well get rent if the house is for rent. If, again, the house was not advertised for rent, that's a different case, because in that case, there was nothing that was lost. The person wasn't going to rent out the barn, because if the barn stank of horse manure and chickens and things like that, nobody was going to reside there. So it was not for rent. They do, however, say that they're generally not negative forces where they, as far as I know, where the animals or some form of life force residing in the house. It's only if it's completely desolate like the shed. Then there's another interpretation, Art, according to what you would have done.
Yeah.
And that is proposed as follows. It says, one who lives in the yard of his fellow, which is not for rent without the latter's knowledge, does not have to pay him rent because it's stated and through desolation it's broken apart. So that we've discussed. But Mar Bar Rav Ashi said, I saw myself, this demon at work on a vacant house, and he was battering it like a rampaging bull. So what is his version of that actually mean? He didn't actually interpret it as literally a demon. The houses then were made out of wood. And he said it looked like a rampaging bull. This is in the notes of Bava Kamma. Why? Because there was nothing left of the house. It said it became naturally disintegrated as a result of the planks and beams being eaten to pieces by wood-eating insects like termites. And he used the exaggerated metaphor of a rampaging bull to convey that the house fell into a state of ruin so extensive that it couldn't be great if the bull had battered at the walls and the roof. That's Rama cited by Nimukei Yosef, okay? Yeah. And what it's saying is as follows, is Rav Yosef said an inhabited house remains habitable. So what that is saying, is very simple, is that if residents stay in a property, they see what needs to repair and they attend to it because they're living in the house. So they've got pride in where they're living. Yeah. So if things are starting to deteriorate the house and they see a big spider, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to take out a can of doom. If they have termites or they have any sort of insect infestation or any sort of degradation of the property, they're going to start to paint it and look after it because they have a bit of pride in the place that they're renting. They're not squatters. So therefore, the benefit is to the property itself. So according to the first opinion, there's no spiritual forces residing in there when there's human beings living. And the second one is there's no desolation when people have pride of ownership and they're looking after their place. So according to either one, it's beneficial to have tenants, but as Arthur quite rightly said, that if they would stand to lose revenue as a person squatting there and saying, I'm looking after your place, that person would much rather have a tenant that pays. And obviously, if somebody is paying and they're residing in the premises, there's going to be no negative forces either way because a person is occupying those premises. Now, 21a2, the Gemara records an incident. There was a man who built a mansion on a dump site owned by orphans. Rav Nachman took his mansion from him. So since the house was being used, how do I put it like this? Okay. I think I need to just introduce the topic slowly because we're hitting something completely different. Now, all right, let's picture it like this. There were orphans. It doesn't mean that when we say orphans, it's necessarily children. What we refer to as legal orphans is that children that have inherited a house or a property or land from their parents. Okay? So they've inherited land from their parents. So you have some guy that decided there was a huge plot of land to start to build a mansion on this, what looked like to him to be a dump site. Now, why would you think that he would build a mansion on a dump site? And what do you think would be meant by the word mansion?
Big house, massive house, like.
Yeah, so look, I mean, our version of mansion today is a little bit different to the version of mansion in those particular days.
Okay.
In the sense that mansion could be relative to the dump site that they were staying in. In other words, the guy didn't want to pay the full value of the property. If he'd have gone to any place where, for example, he bought a mansion in Santon.
Yeah.
In that particular place, the value of the land is worth a fortune of money. Now, if a guy wants to have an opulent house, what this actually means is that the guy can't have an opulent house and afford to pay for property in an expensive area. So this guy had to make a choice. He has a tiny house in a very affluent area, or he has a huge house in a very rundown area. So this guy decided to build his huge property on a dump site. And we learned from the Gemara that this person was actually a professional builder, and he probably got a lot of cheap labor to build the house. But he thought the house was unoccupied because it used the term dump site, meaning it's some field randomly that he thought wasn't owned by anybody, because the orphans didn't really look after the place and keep you're talking about hectares of land. They thought it was basically nobody was going to claim the land. So what happened then was Rav Nachman took his mansion from him and basically said that I'm holding it until you pay the orphans their due, because you're not allowed to be on their land. This is a Gemara from Bava Kamma 101a and b, because you haven't paid to build anything on their land. So it's saying, I'm not taking it away from you permanently, but you're not entitled to have that property unless you compensate the owner of the land. So he held it until they were paid the orphans their due. So the Gemara inquires, shall we say that Rav Nachman holds that one who lives in the yard of his fellow without the latter's knowledge must pay him rent? So he's using this as an example. So at this point, we're assuming that no one was aware that the mansion was built and that the orphans weren't earning anything from their land. So that's why it's using this particular example in Bava Kamma. So the Gemara replies, no, that land had previously been inhabited by Comanians. Comanians. I don't know what a Comanian is. Okay. But Comanians were obviously a people from Comania. That's all I can work out. Okay, it's people from the province of Comania. That's according to Rashi. Okay? So I don't know where they're from, but they rocked up on the land.
Yeah, funny dude.
So basically, what he's saying is that by displacing the Comanians, the builder caused the orphans a loss, albeit a nominal one, because Comanians basically paid the orphans a nominal fee for use of that land. So what do we mean? These guys were like gypsies. So what happens is, I don't think they built any formal settlements. I think they built, informal tents, or they might have had wagons or things like that. And they lived on the land, but they didn't have much affordability. And they paid a nominal fee for the land because they didn't actually build permanent structures on the land, you could see. Okay. So now what's happened is that because there's a mansion there, and the person built the mansion on land that was not his, he chased the Comanians away. And because he chased the Comanians away, the orphans lost that money of rent that they would have earned from the Comanians. Okay. So but basically, it's saying in this case, you can't use this stuff as an example. Why can't you use this stuff as an example, Gavin? I can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Unmute. There we go.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Okay, you got me there somewhere.
Yeah, I've got you, but not visually now again.
Okay. Have to speak.
I can see you and now I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Gav.
Okay, now you're okay.
I can hear you now, yeah.
All right. So why is it a bad example? Let's see if I remember. I think it's a bad example, if I remember what you were just saying, is that the gypsies were just renting, okay, which means that it was a much lower amount. Now this guy's built a mansion, so what value do you really pay? Does he pay the value of what the mansion's worth now, or the value that these guys were getting, that the orphans were getting when they were being paid by the gypsies? So my guess, if I have my 2 cents, is that they should get the value of the Egyptians, of the not Egyptians, what do you call them? Gypsies, because that was the value of the land. Yeah, because this guy who built the mansion obviously improved the land, and he should benefit from that. So there's one of two things here: either he pays the difference, or no, he must keep paying them the amount that the gypsies were paying the orphans. I think that's only just and fair.
Okay, good. So Gavin actually knows what's going on.
Providing the gypsies. Sorry, one more second. Providing the gypsies legitimately took the land under the what's it called? They were allowed to take the land by the orphans, so that it was done in good faith. If it's all done in good faith, then that's the amount that they should receive, in my opinion.
Okay, so Kev, Arthur, Gavin saying as follows. Okay, the first thing I just want to preface it with is that at first this brought a case because we thought that the orphans didn't lose any money because the land wasn't for rent. So we initially brought this case as an example from Bava Kamma, where the person that built the mansion might not have had to have paid the orphans because exactly as Gavin said, we were learning a case previously about improving the land. So we said that when there was a tenant, like Arthur brought, that actually fixed up the property or looked after the property and the rent and the land wasn't for rent, then in fact, he does create an improvement. And in this case of Bava Kamma, the guy that built a mansion actually improved the area. Why do we say improve the area? It's equivalent to you've got a place in Yeovil and suddenly this billionaire is building a mansion there. The whole place looks better as a result. And if you're selling the land, even though you don't charge the builder that built the mansion, it makes the whole place look more upmarket. So it used this initially, as Gavin might have suggested, the second party definitely did, but Arthur also suggested, is that there is an improvement made to the land, which Gavin did say, meaning that the owner of the land did benefit. But initially we were under assumption that the place was not for rent and therefore it was okay. Now we added a particular part which changed the picture. The Komanians, who were gypsies, actually were paying the orphans a nominal rate for use of the land, and that was the arrangement. Now the orphans have lost because this mansion owner cheekily chased the Komanians away from what he deemed as a nuisance on his new mansion property. But he was so cheeky because the reality is the Komanians had an arrangement with the orphan to pay them a nominal rent. So yes, the rent might not have been high, but they were still earning money from the Komanians. So now Rav Nachman, basically, he was in charge of that generation, took the mansion and held it and said, listen, you have to come to some sort of an arrangement here. And that arrangement is, as Gavin said, how do we make that arrangement? Does he compensate the orphans what the equivalent of what they'd earned from the Komanians, because they then sustained a loss? So he should at least equal that fee, that nominal fee that they're earning from the Komanians. I mean, nobody ever said what happened to the Komanians, but that the orphans should be compensated. I'm assuming the Komanians went to rent elsewhere, so that the orphans didn't sustain a loss. Or do we say that had the mansion owner rented from similar premises elsewhere, in other words, in the same suburb, he would have had to pay a heck of a lot more than the nominal fee that the Komanians paid for the property. Because again, the Komanians didn't seem to build permanent structures. They were like gypsies. So, for example, maybe they were entitled to the full amount that the mansion owner should pay for building a property on such a land, meaning it wasn't a fee that you would charge for somebody who bought property in Sandton, but maybe that you still owe for the property that you built in Bears Valley and for the value of that land. Maybe not a nominal fee for what squatters or gypsies would have rented the land for. So which one is it? That's what Gavin's asking. Am I correct, Gav?
Yeah. Which one is it?
So the thing of it is, it's basically, according to Tosfot, he should have to pay the full amount for the benefit, the Buddha. But according to the Rosh, we learn that the court has the right to push for a compromise to make sure both parties are happy. Even though the orphans receive less than their full entitlement, it's in order to make sure that there's shalom between both parties. And it says here, in order to spare the orphans from their dispute. Well, I must be honest with you. If I were them, I would certainly say I'm not happy with a compromise, because it's not fair that the person didn't ask permission and I now have to take this nominal fee. Because the Khomeinians in good faith have now been displaced, and they at least had the courtesy to speak to me of this arrangement. Now this big guy with the mansion chased the Khomeinians away, didn't have the courtesy to speak to me, and now he wants it for the same fee as the Khomeinians. So I don't know. I'm assuming in the court proceeding it might be a happy medium. It might not be as low as the fee that was suggested about what he would pay, the equivalent of the Khomeinians. Maybe it was a similar fee to what he should have paid versus the Khomeinians, and the fee was somewhere in the middle. Yeah, I'm not sure. All the Gemara ends off with is the following, is that the Gemara replies that land had been previously inhabited by the Khomeinians, who had paid the orphans a nominal fee for the use of that land. So Rav Nachman said to the builder who displaced the Khomeinians, go placate the orphans by giving them compensation that they found acceptable. So therefore, if it uses the term acceptable, it means the happy medium, something that every party would be happy with. But the builder paid no heed to Rav Nachman's instruction, so Rav Nachman confiscated his mansion from them. Okay, good. And we're going to end off on this note, guys. I hope it's been clear.
Yeah, it's been great, Damon.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you,
All right.
Damon.
So listen, that new experiment doesn't work great about reading the entire daf in 2 seconds flat. I think we're going to stick to what we did and do a daf a week. And we did. We've been doing that. All right, guys, have a wonderful Sunday. Yeah?
Yeah, no. Stick to a daf a week. It's working